The story begins in the outer reaches of the galaxy, where a quiet but important mission is taking place. The Righteous Fury, a ship built from salvaged parts and scrap metal, drifts slowly through the void. Its mission was simple enough to patrol an unimportant sector of space and ensure no one was breaking any laws. No one expected this ship to become anything more than a floating tin can with a skeleton crew, but humanity had other plans. Commander Alyssa Thompson stands at the helm of the ship, her hand steady on the controls, though she could feel the weight of responsibility press against her chest. Beneath the surface of her calm exterior was a sense of urgency. She had heard the rumors, the whispers that the Righteous Fury was the ship. No one trusted that it was a joke in the eyes of the galactic community. She wasn't sure how true those whispers were, but one thing was clear: there was a war coming, and they were not ready for it. As the ship glides through the emptiness of space, Alyssa can't help but glance around at her crew. They are young and untested. Their confidence is high, but their experience is low. The ship itself feels as though it could fall apart at any moment, but it had something else that no one else could see. It had the human spirit, it had determination, and the fierce will to survive no matter what. The crew of the Righteous Fury moves through the ship with a sense of purpose, even if they don't know what that purpose is yet. They had been assigned to this mission, not because they were the best, but because they were the only ones available at the time. This was a last-minute decision. No one else wanted to waste time on a ship like this. But Alyssa had faith in them all, and deep down, she knew they had more potential than anyone could guess. Chief Engineer Karen works tirelessly in the engine room, always looking for ways to improve the ship's systems, while the rest of the crew takes turns training on combat maneuvers and emergency procedures. Karen's modifications, though small at first, were starting to make a difference. Even the most mundane systems were slowly becoming more reliable and efficient. He had his work cut out for him, but he was beginning to see results. His passion for making the ship work was infectious, and his belief in the Righteous Fury's potential rubbed off on everyone. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Carson walks the halls of the ship, always making sure the crew is prepared for anything that could go wrong. He was a natural leader, and though his title didn't carry the same weight as Alyssa's, he had an uncanny ability to keep the crew calm in tense situations. He was quick with a joke or a reassuring word. Whenever anyone started to doubt their abilities, he always found a way to bring them back to their feet with a smile. As the days drift on, the ship stays mostly out of contact with the rest of the galaxy. No one thought it necessary to check on them. No one thought they would matter in the grand scheme of things. They were just another forgotten piece of the puzzle in the endless void of space, until one day that silence is broken. A call comes through, a warning, a threat from an empire they had no reason to fear: the Zilkar Dominion, a ruthless race with advanced technology and a hunger for conquest. They were coming, and no one knew what to do. Alyssa stares at the communication screen. Her heart races. The words on the screen are chilling, but she doesn't flinch. She looks over at her crew and knows they are about to face something far beyond anything they could ever have imagined. This would be their test, and they would pass it no matter the cost. The Zilkar Dominion had always been a name that caused whispers in the corridors of power across the galaxy. Their fleet was vast, and their technology advanced beyond anything humanity had developed to this point. Alyssa could feel the tension building in the air. The message from the Dominion was clear. They were targeting a human colony on the edge of the galaxy, and if no one stopped them, they would wipe it out without hesitation. The Righteous Fury was the only ship in range, but the rest of the galaxy's military forces were too far away to help. The human colonies were isolated on the outer rim, and no one cared enough to risk the resources to defend them. Alyssa knew she had no choice. She would have to stand her ground and face the Zilkars with her crew at her side. The crew gathered in the command center as Alyssa briefed them on the situation. She knew they were not ready for this battle, but they were all she had. They were undertrained, outgunned, and outclassed. But in that moment, something clicked in her mind. They were humans, and there was one thing that no one expected from them. They could adapt faster than any other species in the galaxy. Alyssa had seen it before. Humans had a way of thinking outside the box, of making things work when it seemed impossible, and this time they would do it again. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for help," she said, her voice steady but full of resolve. "We have what we have, And that's it, we fight with everything we've got. We're going to show the galaxy what humanity is made of. The crew nodded in agreement. They didn't know how they would do it, but they knew they would try their best. They didn't have the resources of the other galactic powers, but they had something else. They had each other. They had the courage to fight back when the odds were stacked against them. And that was enough. Kieran in the engine room worked tirelessly to get the ship's systems into working order. Every modification he could make was a potential advantage, even if it was just a small one. Carson ran drills with the crew, making sure everyone knew their roles and could react quickly if things went south. Lieutenant Carson's experience in close combat became invaluable as he trained the crew to fight in zero-gravity environments while preparing for what they might face on the ground. Outside the ship, the galaxy seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but they all knew that the storm was coming soon. The Zilkar fleet was moving into position, and they had only a few hours before the battle would begin. Alyssa stared at the star map on the wall, watching as the enemy fleet's course became clearer. They were not only coming for the colony, but for everything humanity had built up to that point. It was a declaration of war on a species that had only just begun to prove itself. She turned to her crew, her heart pounding in her chest, but her voice steady. We're going to do something no one thinks we can do. We're going to make sure humanity has a future out here. No matter what it takes, we're going to give them everything we've got, and then some. The crew responded in unison, a fierce determination in their eyes. We're with you, Captain. The righteous fury wasn't ready for war, but humanity was more than ready to fight. The righteous fury crept closer to the battlefield. The crew was tense. Each member of the team knew they were facing an impossible fight, but no one said a word of doubt. Alyssa stood at the helm, her hands tight on the controls, as she watched the Zilkar fleet approach. On the tactical display, they were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded, but she refused to let that reality define them. The first shots rang out in the distance as the Zilkar ships began to move into attack formation. Alyssa barked out orders quickly to her crew, each order sharp and precise. There was no room for hesitation now, no room for fear. The crew had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for the chaos that was about to unfold. On the bridge, Lieutenant Carson kept his eyes on the monitors, while his team in the lower decks scrambled to keep systems online. Kieran was already deep in the ship's engine room, working frantically to optimize the ship's speed and power output. Every second counted as the Zilkar fleet bore down on them. The first wave of enemy ships launched their weapons with devastating force, targeting the colony in the distance. Alyssa gritted her teeth. They couldn't let the Zilkars reach the colony. They had to hold them off for as long as possible. She slammed her fist on the console. The righteous fury bucked as the first impacts sent a shudder through the ship, but the hull held strong for now. The crew sprang into action, working with a fierce determination that caught the Zilkars off guard. While other alien fleets relied on brute force and overwhelming numbers, the humans aboard the righteous fury had no such luxury. They had to be smarter, faster, more unpredictable. The humans knew how to think on their feet and use the environment to their advantage. The crew started to fight back with what little they had, using the asteroid fields nearby as cover and creating traps that the Zilkars weren't expecting. The righteous fury darted between the asteroids, avoiding enemy fire and taking shots at the Zilkar ships from unexpected angles. Kieran's modifications were paying off. He had tweaked the ship's engines to give them more power, allowing the righteous fury to make faster turns than any other ship in the fleet. This new maneuverability allowed them to dodge incoming fire and return fire with surprising accuracy. The ship's weapons were outdated, but the crew had become experts in using them creatively. Carson's team down in the lower decks managed to rig some of the colony's defense systems to send bursts of energy to the righteous fury's shields, providing a temporary boost. Just when they needed it most, the Zilkars had thought the humans would be easily overpowered, but the humans were fighting with everything they had and more. They had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The first hour of battle was chaos. Loud explosions rocked the righteous fury as the ship was hit multiple times, but it didn't slow down. The crew kept fighting back, using the terrain and their ingenuity to confuse the Zilkars, even as they were outgunned and outmatched. Alyssa couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as the ship weaved through the asteroid field and managed to strike back at the Zilkar fleet time and time again. The Righteous Fury was no longer just a ship, it had become a symbol of humanity's defiance, a ship that should have been destroyed, but was still standing tall, proving that humanity could fight with the best of them. The battle was far from over, but in this moment the crew of the Righteous Fury knew one thing: they weren't going down without a fight. The Righteous Fury had taken a beating, but Alyssa was far from ready to throw in the towel. The Zilkar fleet was relentless, but the humans aboard the ship were determined to make a stand. Alyssa knew they couldn't keep dodging forever. They needed to find a way to deal a decisive blow to the enemy flagship, or they'd never get out of this alive. She gathered her senior officers in the war room as the battle raged outside. "We have to hit them where it hurts," she said, her voice steady, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. "The Zilkar fleet is too strong, and we're running out of time. We need to take out their flagship. If we don't cripple their command structure, we're just prolonging the inevitable." Lieutenant Carson nodded. He'd been studying the Zilkar fleet's formation with laser focus. He knew their tactics by heart. The Zilkars were known for their pride and arrogance. They believed no one could outsmart them, and that could be their downfall. "I've been watching their movements," he said. "We don't have the firepower to go head-to-head, but if we can sneak in close enough and disable their weapon systems, we might have a chance at getting a clean shot at their flagship's weak points. We can take them by surprise, but it's going to be risky as hell." Alyssa considered this for a moment. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was the best chance they had. All the odds were against them, but in that moment she realized they couldn't afford to play it safe. They had to go all in or risk losing everything. "Let's do it," she said. "We don't get another shot at this. We hit them hard and fast, and hope to the stars they don't see us coming." The crew sprang into action. The ship lurched forward as the Righteous Fury made its way toward the heart of the Zilkar Armada. The Zilkars, with their superior sensors and weapons, didn't expect the humans to be bold enough to get so close. They underestimated the Righteous Fury's speed and the crew's ability to think on their feet. Karen had been working on a new engine mod that would temporarily overclock the ship's engines, giving them a boost of speed, long enough to close the distance between them and the enemy flagship. He had done it before in testing, but this was different. They didn't have the luxury of time or mistakes. Kieran's voice crackled over the comms as he made the final adjustments to the engines. "This is going to be close," he said, "but we've got one shot at this." The Righteous Fury shot forward with newfound speed, weaving through enemy fire as the Zilkars scrambled to lock onto the ship's unpredictable movements. Alyssa gripped the controls with everything she had as the ship closed in on the flagship. The crew held their breath, knowing that one wrong move would mean certain death, but they had no other choice. When they were within striking range, Alyssa gave the order to fire the ship's experimental cannon that had been cobbled together in the last few days. It was their last hope. The cannon fired, and the blast was like a pulse of pure energy, cutting through the heart of the Zilkar flagship. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the flagship's shields began to fail and explosions erupted from within the ship. As the blast found its mark, Alyssa let out a breath. She didn't know she was holding. The flagship was crippled. The Zilkar fleet was in disarray. The Righteous Fury wasn't out of danger yet, but they had made their mark. The Zilkars would not forget this day. No matter how hard they tried, the humans had struck back, and it was the beginning of something much bigger than anyone had imagined. The battle had shifted in humanity's favor. The Zilkar fleet was thrown into chaos, the flagship now crippled, and their command structure disrupted. The Righteous Fury had dealt a devastating blow, but Alyssa knew they couldn't rest on their laurels just yet. The Zilkars were relentless, and they would be back in full force soon enough. If they didn't finish what they started, they'd be the ones wiped out. The crew worked tirelessly to maintain the ship's systems after the fierce assault. The engines were running hot, and the hull was battered beyond recognition, but they were alive, and the ship was still functional barely, but it was enough. Kieran's hands were covered in grease and sweat as he worked in the engine room. Each modification he made was a gamble, but it was paying off. He had turned the Righteous Fury into a ship that could stand toe-to-toe with the mightiest warships in the galaxy, using only the scraps and leftover parts they had salvaged from the wreckage of other ships. He had given the crew the chance they needed. On the bridge, Lieutenant Carson was coordinating the defensive efforts as the Zilkars reorganized for another assault. "We can't let them regroup," he said. "We have to keep the pressure on them. If we give them a moment to recover, they'll crush us." Alyssa nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. She knew they had to take advantage of the opening they had created by crippling the flagship. Now was their time to press forward while the Zilkars were still disoriented. "We'll hit them again," she said. "We go after their support ships, the ones supplying their fleet with reinforcements. If we can take those out, we'll cripple their ability to fight back and force them to retreat." The crew didn't hesitate. They were already in motion. Each person knew their role in this final push. There was no room for mistakes, no time for second thoughts. The righteous fury sped forward once again, this time targeting the Zilkar supply ships hidden among the Armada. The Zilkars were trying to form a defensive perimeter around the remaining forces, but the humans were too fast and too unpredictable to pin down. As the ship moved into position, Carson led a team to launch a series of strikes at the supply lines using the same tactics they had perfected in the asteroid field days earlier. They knew the Zilkars would be expecting a full-on assault, so they used the element of surprise. Once more they struck fast and hard, taking out supply ship after supply ship before the Zilkars had a chance to retaliate. Meanwhile, Alyssa and Kieran worked together to adapt the ship's weapons systems. The Righteous Fury's weaponry had always been subpar compared to the Zilkars, but Kieran had made modifications that allowed them to use the weapons more efficiently and with deadly accuracy. They didn't need a direct hit, they just needed to make every shot count. And they did. The Zilkars were now scrambling. Their supply lines were severed, and their forces were running low on resources. The tide was turning in favor of humanity, but the fight was far from over. The Righteous Fury was battered and bruised, but its crew was stronger than ever. They had come to realize that the ship wasn't just a tool for survival. It was a symbol of their willpower, their ingenuity, and their refusal to give up no matter what. As Alyssa looked out at the battlefield, she knew they had only just begun. The Zilkars might regroup and come back stronger, but this time they would be prepared. This time, humanity would not be underestimated again. They had proven they were a force to be reckoned with, and nothing would change that now. The Righteous Fury sailed through the vastness of space, with the crew pushing forward into the unknown. As the Zilkar fleet slowly recovered from the previous blows they had suffered, Alyssa knew they couldn't afford to relax. Not now, not ever again. They had taken a step toward victory, but the Zilkars were resilient, and they wouldn't stop until humanity was crushed. On the bridge, the mood had shifted from desperation to cautious optimism. They had won their first major battle, but the war was far from over. Alyssa kept her eyes on the tactical display and her hands steady on the controls as she led the ship deeper into enemy territory. Each move was a calculated risk, but she wasn't about to back down now. Lieutenant Carson walked up to her, his expression grim despite the small victories. "We can't keep dodging their full force," he said. "We've made them bleed, but they'll be back with everything they have soon enough." Alyssa nodded. She knew he was right. Their enemies were regrouping, and if they didn't make another strike, soon they could face a counterattack that would overwhelm them. The Righteous Fury had proven its worth, but there was only so much a battered ship and an undertrained crew could take. "I know," she said. "We don't have the luxury of a second chance. We've got to strike again while they're weak. If we hit them now, we might have a shot at finishing this before they recover." The crew rallied around her words. They had come this far, and they weren't about to back down now. They had faced impossible odds and survived, and the idea of leaving everything they'd fought for to chance wasn't an option. Kieran was already in the engine room running diagnostics and tweaking the ship's systems even further. He had pushed the Righteous Fury to its limits, but he wasn't stopping there. With every upgrade, every improvement he brought the ship closer to its full potential. The crew didn't have the finest equipment, but Kieran had a way of making what they had work better than it had any right to. The battle wasn't over, but for a brief moment Alyssa allowed herself to feel a small flicker of hope. The Righteous Fury wasn't just surviving anymore. It was becoming a symbol of humanity's resilience. They were proving that they could fight back against the odds, and that no matter how outmatched they were, they had the spirit to keep pushing forward. As they closed in on the next Zilkar stronghold, Alyssa turned to Carson and Kieran. They had a plan now. It was time to execute it. We'll hit their command center, she said. This time we go straight for the heart of their operation. We take out their communications and their leadership. If we do that, we can throw their entire fleet into disarray. Carson's eyes were filled with determination. We've got this, Captain. We've shown them before that they can't underestimate us. We'll do it again. The righteous fury moved stealthily into position, taking advantage of every shadow, every blind spot to avoid detection. They were ready for their most dangerous strike. Yet this would be their moment to truly turn the tide of the war. The Zilkars had underestimated humanity's ingenuity and heart before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Alyssa knew this battle would be fierce, and the stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in a long while, she felt confident that they might just have a chance to win the unthinkable and change the course of history forever. The righteous fury approached the Zilkar command center with quiet determination. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, their focus unbreakable. Every member of the crew knew this was the critical moment, their last chance to strike at the heart of the enemy. Before they could mount a counteroffensive, Alyssa stood at the helm, her hands steady, her mind sharp, as she glanced over at her crew. All systems are go, Captain Carson reported from his station. The crew is ready. We're moving into position now. The Zilkars won't see us coming. Alyssa nodded. The plan had been set. They would approach from behind a nearby asteroid field, using the dense debris to mask their approach. The righteous fury had become a shadow in space. No longer the target of the Zilkars' focus, their arrogance had given the humans the upper hand once again. Kieran had been working non-stop for hours, making the final adjustments to the ship's systems. He had rigged the weapons to fire in short bursts. While minimizing energy consumption, he had also reinforced the ship's shields as much as he could with the limited resources they had left. The righteous fury was a patchwork of salvaged parts, but it was strong now. It was ready. We're closing in, Alyssa said, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. Get ready. Carson stood by the communication console, monitoring the Zilkar fleet's movements. They're distracted. He said they're too focused on recovering from the last attack. They don't expect a fight from us this soon. Alyssa glanced at the tactical display. The Zilkar ships were still regrouping. Their command center was vulnerable. If they timed this right, they could tear through it before the Zilkars could call for reinforcements. A sudden flash of light lit up the command center's shields as the righteous fury broke through the final line of defense. The Zilkars reacted too slowly. Their weapons fired wildly, but the righteous fury dodged and weaved through their fire like a snake in the grass. Every shot that landed on them was absorbed by the reinforced shields or deflected by careful maneuvering. Fire the main cannon, Alyssa ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. With everything on the line, there was no room for hesitation. The ship's cannon fired with a mighty roar. The blast rippled through the space around them, hitting the Zilkar command center dead center. The explosion was massive, and for a moment, the entire battlefield seemed to stop. The Zilkars weren't prepared for the devastation the righteous fury had caused. We've done it, Carson said, his voice full of disbelief. The command center is down. They've lost their coordination. Alyssa allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but the fight wasn't over yet. The Zilkar fleet was still formidable, and they would regroup quickly. The righteous fury was still a ship of limited resources, but in this moment the crew had done something no one had thought possible. They had struck at the heart of the enemy, and they had won. But as the remnants of the Zilkar command center burned in space, Alyssa knew this victory was just the beginning. The Zilkars would come for them with everything they had left, and they had no intention of letting humanity walk away from this fight. But the righteous fury and its crew had proven they could stand against any challenge and survive. The battle for humanity's survival wasn't over, but now they knew something the Zilkars hadn't expected. Humans could fight like hell and win against all odds, and that knowledge was their greatest weapon. The righteous fury had dealt a crushing blow to the Zilkars, but the war was far from won. Alyssa knew the Zilkars were a proud species, and they wouldn't take this defeat lightly. They would regroup and come at humanity with everything they had left. But the crew of the righteous fury had proven something essential. They had proven they could hold their own against the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, and they would do it again. The ship's sensors detected the movements of the remaining Zilkar forces as they began to shift into defensive formations. Alyssa had no doubt that they would be back in full force, but they weren't the only ones adapting. The crew had learned from each battle. They fought. They had become sharper, more resourceful, and above all more united than ever before. "We've done it once, we can do it again," Alyssa said, standing tall in the command center as she looked at her crew. "We're not just surviving out here anymore, we're winning, and that's something the galaxy won't forget." Kieran had made modifications to the ship once again, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the limited resources they had. They had more speed, more firepower, and more determination than ever before. He had turned the Righteous Fury into a ship that could face anything the galaxy threw at it and still come out standing. The crew was ready for whatever came next. They had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. They had learned to fight not just with their weapons, but with their minds. They had become unpredictable, and that had become their greatest strength. They would need every bit of that strength as the Zilkar fleet began to regroup. Their forces were massive, and their pride would make them reckless. But humanity had learned that it wasn't the size of the fleet that mattered, it was the heart and the will of those who flew the ships, and the crew of the Righteous Fury had that in abundance. Alyssa had a plan. The Zilkars would strike at them in waves, but if they could draw the enemy into a series of smaller skirmishes, they could pick them off one by one. The Righteous Fury was agile, and the crew had become experts in guerrilla tactics. They could make the Zilkars fight on their terms, and that was a fight they could win. The first wave of Zilkars came charging in with full force, but Alyssa held her ground. She led the Righteous Fury through the asteroid fields, dodging their attacks and picking off smaller ships one by one. Carson's crew handled the close combat with deadly precision, each strike leaving the Zilkars more disoriented and less able to fight back. Kieran continued to push the ship to its limits. The Righteous Fury was more than just a vessel now. It was a force of nature. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance against an enemy that thought they could destroy them, and with every passing minute they proved the Zilkars wrong. By the time the final wave of Zilkars arrived, they were broken. Their fleet was in tatters, and their morale shattered. Alyssa and her crew had done the impossible. They had taken on an empire and shown the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The Righteous Fury had not only survived the battle, it had won. It had proven that humanity could stand against the greatest threats the galaxy could offer, and they would continue to fight for their place in the stars. No matter what, the Zilkars would have to reckon with this new force in the galaxy, and they would know one thing for certain: humanity would never back down, never surrender, and never be defeated again.